Welcome back to my review of the book Escaping Emotional Abuse by Lauren Matthias. This is episode 6, and I will be covering chapters 12, 13, and 14. Chapter 12, List for My Life. So Lauren has accepted the job in Boise to be a reporter and is preparing to leave Boston once again. However, on the afternoon, before she's ready to leave, she once again sat down and talked to her husband, telling him that there was nothing more important than their marriage, that work or career came second. And if he didn't want her to leave, if they could figure out another option, that she would stay. Fortunately for Lauren, her husband still stuck with the notion that the decision for her to take this job meant she was leaving the marriage, and he told her to go. So she packed her bags and went. However, she's still questioning. How many times do I need to be shown? How many times do I have to believe in the facade of the man I fell in love with before I understand that man never existed and never would? I was very frustrated once again reading this, that Lauren just was unrealistic about hope for keeping this marriage going. But then I read something that somewhat helped me understand perhaps why she had that mentality. And she talked about that as she was growing up, it had been drilled into her head that you fight to keep a marriage alive. She states, "I had heard so many times that if your spouse loves the Lord and you love the Lord, then any marriage can work." She goes on the next page and says, "How do I know when something was so broken it could never be fixed?" Again, I remember going back to in chapter 9 when she talked about working with her therapist, and that her therapist had helped her to understand that she really was in a losing battle. However, she continues to question and to hope, and it was really quite frustrating. Further on in this chapter, Lauren writes, "Although my marriage was too confusing and dark of a place for me to blog regularly, I started keeping private notes on my phone." This is the first mention in the book that she actually had been blogging, and it would have been helpful to the reader to give some context about her blogging. Was this a private or a public site? How long had she been blogging? What were the topics? I was able to find this blog, and I do plan on speaking about some of the things that I found in that blog, but not in this book review, perhaps in an episode after I finish this entire book. But I was just kind of taken aback because the blogging just is mentioned without any context. But in the rest of the chapter, there are several journal entries that Lauren put in her phone. And they were a combination of messages that were kind of a pep talk to herself about her worth and what she deserved in life and that she was a good person. And then others were really being frank about the problems that she was seeing in her marriage. And that later, then Lauren goes a little bit back in time, and she starts sharing some of the posts, some of the blogs that she wrote, I should say journal entries, as she is calling them. She did not put these out in a blog. About shortly after her marriage, and it was obvious, that she really wasn't happy. But I wanted to focus on an entry that she made on March 3rd of 2013 that were a few weeks before her wedding. And she starts out by saying, "What I want in a man." And she lists a lot of things that, we can all imagine. A healthy communicator, someone that holds my hand when we drive, someone who listens to me, someone who is romantic, someone who appreciates my kindness. And one of the items is someone who respects me. And I really felt like in listening to Lauren's conversations about her husband, the respect part was always to me, it was something that was really not emphasized enough, that she wanted respect. She talked so often about how she just wanted to be loved and to be safe. And she didn't mention that she wanted to be respected, that was important to her. And maybe that's just personal. I think it's a very important part of a marriage. But it is listed as something she was looking for in a man. She questioned why she wrote all these things, and then talked about the fact that she simply did not believe that a specific man like that existed, or if he did exist, that she didn't deserve him. Other women did, but she felt like she didn't deserve him. And she states, "So I settled because I loved him and I hoped for the best." And that really stuck with me, that seemed to be the resounding theme. She loved him, and, love conquers all, right? Lauren ends this chapter again with several words of advice about what people should do if they're looking for a man and you have your own lists. Don't give up on your dreams. Again, we start to see the words of what Lauren has at this time chosen for a career to be a relationship coach. She's leaving Boston now for a second time, and this time on her way to Boise, Idaho, where she thought she would be there for probably no more than a couple of months. However, this turned out to be home for Lauren for the next 2 years. Chapter 13, Learning to Fly. Lauren has arrived in Boise, and she's at the station and starting to report, and she feels like a new person. She's happy, she's making friends, and she's back in a career that she loves. She flew back to Boston when her husband was graduating and talked about their plans. Her husband made it quite clear that he had no intention of living in Boise. He thought he was way too good for Boise, and he was also stuck on his interpretation of her move, that she had left him. So why should he go be with her when she had already left the marriage? While Lauren was still in Boston, she got a call from the station requesting that she do a story with a 12-year-old transgender girl. And Lauren was excited about this opportunity because she always believed in helping people tell their story. Her husband told her immediately, "You need to stay away from topics like that." And he was, of course, concerned that it would be embarrassing to him if she would do a story like that. When Lauren returned to Boise, there was a big story coming out from the Mormon Church about John DeLynn and Kate Kelly. These were two Mormons that were looking to be excommunicated from the church. John, because he had criticized a lot of the church doctrine. He was a same-sex marriage proponent, and he also wanted to see a larger role for women in the church. Kate Kelly primarily focused as a supporter of women in the Mormon church. Lauren, being the only Mormon in the station as a reporter, was asked to cover this. And when her husband found out, once again, he just thought this was a topic she needed to stay away from. It was too controversial. And he frustrated Lauren because he didn't understand that these were good opportunities for her. And also, she really didn't have the ability to pick and choose which stories she was going to cover. And she started to realize that he was never going to respect this career. Her husband never did move to Boise, and shortly after graduation, he left Boston. And instead of being with her, he stayed with different family members and friends. He was jobless and homeless, but he found that being with others was preferable to being with Lauren. He did on occasion visit her, but he would leave all his possessions in the car and just go out to the car and bring in what he needed. It was obvious that this was not going to be home for him. Reality is really starting to sink in with Lauren, that her marriage was over, her marriage was not working. And she started believing in herself, believing that she could take care of herself. She started developing a lot of friends at the station, and she actually won an award for her story that she did with the 12-year-old transgender girl. Chapter 13, Expressing Gratitude for Your Stories. In this chapter, Lauren starts out talking about the reasons why she decided that she would write this book. And one of the first reasons that she mentions, and I'm going to read from her book directly, during my marriage, I wish there had been more blogs like mine. I don't believe emotional abuse is talked about enough or written about enough, and that makes me angry. I wanted to do something about it and make a contribution to this vastly ignored topic. Once again, there's a reference to this nebulous blog that we don't get to see a single entry from. And I think if that blog was so important to Lauren in deciding to write this book, it's the first reason that she mentions, then there should have been more information about the blog. A second important reason that Lauren mentions is that in her 5 years as a TV reporter, she had learned the value of stories and convincing people to tell their stories and to encourage their vulnerability during her interviews. She wanted people to trust her with their stories. She believed that her story was finally worth telling, especially if it might startle some people out of complacency and help them to change. Thus far, I have not seen and listening to Lauren's story that she has demonstrated the ability to change and to move out of complacency. She was really forced to by her husband and, not wanting to be with her as she moved to Boise. So perhaps we'll see later on something more compelling. But right now, her story to me would not be encouraging to anyone in a similar situation. Another reason why she wanted to write the book was to help people. She wanted to provide a voice for those stuck in similar situations. I wanted women and men to know they're not alone. Well, I find that of some value. Just knowing that you're not alone isn't really helpful in getting you to a better situation. Again, perhaps later in the book, we'll see more advice in this direction. She talked about wanting to show the details of her story to convey the real difficulties of living in a toxic relationship. Once again, just knowing that living in a toxic relationship doesn't really help anyone improve the situation. So thus far, I'm not really convinced that her reasons for sharing her story are of a great deal of help in a relationship such as hers. She talked about that people left her because of feeling uneasy about her blog, that she lost friends. Once again, we mentioned the blog, not knowing what's in the blog and what might make friends uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to move on from the blog now. She finally talks about that she's in a very good place right now. But before she can tell that story, she needs to tell the authentic story of how she arrived in a good place, which means reflecting back upon all the pain and sorrow that led to some wisdom. In the rest of the chapter, Lauren shares stories that have been sent to her since the beginning of this book. Pages and pages of people thanking her in response to what she had written in her blog. So we see responses from people that read her blog, but once again, we don't know what was in the blog and what they are responding to. In reading many of the responses that Lauren received to her blog, once again, we have no idea what she wrote, but we see the responses. I was able to see that, yes, it sounded like she was able to help people by telling her story. However, I think her story is in her blog more than in this book. I apologize for a couple of errors I made in this episode. The chapter 13 is daring to fly, not learning to fly. And I also made the mistake of saying that expressing gratitude for your stories was chapter 13. And it's actually chapter 14. I apologize for these errors. The only time I have any quiet in my house is when it's quite late and I am quite tired. So I apologize for the mistakes.